The waitress sang to calm a crying child. The chic billionaire froze when he recognized the voice of his missing wife. The restaurant hummed with the quiet elegance of old money and new fortunes. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over white tablecloths, and the soft clink of silverware against fine china created a symphony of privilege. In the heart of Manhattan, Bellinotte was where billionaires came to be seen, where deals worth millions were sealed over plates of handmade pasta and bottles of wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Layla Bennett moved through this world like a ghost. At 26, she had perfected the art of invisibility. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a tight, practical bun. Her green eyes, once bright with dreams and laughter, now stayed carefully lowered. The black and white uniform she wore was crisp and spotless, just like the dozen other servers who glided between tables with practiced efficiency. But unlike them, Layla carried a weight that had nothing to do with the heavy trays balanced on her palm. She had been working at Bellinotte for 2 years now. 2 years of blending into the background, of being the girl who never complained, never caused trouble, never drew attention. The manager loved her because she was reliable. The other servers barely noticed her because she was quiet. The customers looked through her because to them, she was just part of the furniture, as forgettable as the coat check girl or the valet outside. But Layla hadn't always been invisible. 3 years ago, she had been someone else entirely. Someone with a different name, a different life, a different future. 3 years ago, she had worn designer gowns instead of a server's uniform. She had attended galas instead of serving at them. She had been loved, cherished, protected. And then, in one devastating moment, everything had been ripped away. The memory tried to surface as she refilled water glasses at table 12. But Layla pushed it down with the practiced ease of someone who had spent 1,000 days running from her past. She couldn't afford to remember. Not here. Not now. Not ever. More bread, please, a woman in a Chanel suit said, without looking up from her phone. Of course, ma'am, Layla replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She hurried to the kitchen, grateful for the task, for anything that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. The kitchen was chaos as always during the dinner rush. Chef Marco was shouting in Italian at one of the line cooks. Servers rushed in and out, calling orders, grabbing plates. Layla retrieved a basket of warm focaccia and was heading back to the dining room when she heard it, a commotion at the front entrance that made the entire restaurant pause. Through the small window in the kitchen door, she could see the maitre d' practically bowing as he ushered in a group of men. But these weren't ordinary wealthy patrons. These men commanded attention in a way that made even the billionaires already seated sit up a little straighter. Leading them was a man who seemed to draw all the light in the room toward himself. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his traditional white thobe perfectly. Over it, he wore a black bish embroidered with gold thread that caught the light with every movement. His gutture was pristine white, held in place by a black agall that sat like a crown. But it was his face that truly captured attention. Strong, angular features, a perfectly trimmed beard that was just beginning to show threads of silver, and eyes so dark they appeared almost black. Eyes that held the kind of authority that came from never being told no. Layla's breath caught in her throat. Her hand gripped the doorframe so hard her knuckles turned white. The basket of bread slipped from her other hand and hit the floor with a soft thud, but she barely noticed. Every cell in her body was screaming at her to run, to hide, to disappear, because she knew that face. She knew those eyes. She had once looked into them and seen her entire future. Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid, her husband, the man she had fled from 3 years ago. Layla, the bread. Marco's voice cut through her paralysis. She bent down mechanically, gathering the scattered focaccia, her hands trembling. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Khalid never came to New York. He hated the city. He had business in Dubai, in London, in Paris. What was he doing here? Are you okay? Sophia, another server, touched her shoulder. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, Layla managed, though her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. Just dizzy for a moment. She forced herself to stand, to breathe, To think. The kitchen door had a small window, but from where Khalid was being seated, at the best table in the house, naturally, he wouldn't be able to see her. She could stay in the back. She could ask Marco to let her work the kitchen tonight. She could, Layla, you're on section 3 tonight, right? The floor manager, David, appeared beside her with his tablet. The Al-Rashid party just sat in your section. This is huge. The Sheikh is worth billions. If you take good care of them, the tip alone could be a month's rent. Her section. Of course it was her section. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. David, could someone else take that table? I'm not feeling well. He looked at her with the impatience of a man dealing with dinner rush complications. Everyone slammed, Layla. You're the only one with capacity. Just smile, be professional, and don't mess this up. This could be great for the restaurant. Before she could protest further, he was gone, already dealing with another crisis. Layla stood frozen, her mind racing through impossible options. She could quit, right now, just walk out and never come back. But she needed this job. She needed the anonymity it provided, the cash tips that didn't require a paper trail, the ability to disappear into the background of someone else's glamorous life. And besides, she told herself as she smoothed down her uniform with shaking hands. 3 years had passed. She looked different now. Thinner, tired. Her hair was darker. She'd been dyeing for years. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, nothing that would remind anyone of the woman she used to be. Khalid was surrounded by beautiful women constantly. Surely he wouldn't recognize a plain waitress in a restaurant thousands of miles from home. Surely. Layla took a deep breath, picked up a new basket of bread and a pitcher of water, and pushed through the kitchen door. The dining room seemed impossibly bright suddenly, every sound amplified. Her footsteps felt too loud on the polished floor as she approached the table where Khalid sat with 4 other men, bodyguards and assistants. She recognized the type, and one small child. The little boy, no more than 4 years old, sat in a booster seat beside Khalid. He had the same dark eyes, the same olive skin. A nephew, perhaps? Khalid had 3 brothers, and they all had children. The boy was playing with a toy car, running along the edge of the table, while the men talked in low voices in Arabic. Layla approached from Khalid's left side, keeping her head down, her voice professionally neutral. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Billionaire. May I start you with some water and bread? She didn't look up, didn't make eye contact, just began filling water glasses with mechanical precision, starting with the bodyguards, working her way around the table. Her hands were steady now, muscle memory taking over. She had done this 1,000 times. She could do it once more. Yes, thank you. One of the assistants replied in accented English. We'll need a few minutes to look at the menu. Of course. I'll be back shortly to take your order. She was turning to leave, her heart pounding with relief at having survived the initial encounter, when the little boy suddenly burst into tears. Not just crying, wailing, the kind of inconsolable sobbing that made every head in the restaurant turn. The toy car clattered to the floor. Yusef, please, Khalid said, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. He reached for the child, but the boy pushed his hands away, crying harder. One of the assistants tried offering the toy back. Another attempted to distract him with a napkin folded into a shape. Nothing worked. The child's cries grew louder, more desperate. The sound of a little one who was overtired, overwhelmed, far from home and comfort. Layla should have walked away, should have let them handle it, should have stayed invisible. But the sound of that child's crying hit something deep inside her, something she had locked away 3 years ago and sworn never to touch again. Before she could stop herself, before logic could override instinct, she was kneeling beside the booster seat. Hey, little one, she said softly in Arabic, her voice gentle. It's okay. Everything's okay. The boy hiccuped, his crying stuttering for a moment at the unexpected sound of his native language from this stranger. Layla reached out slowly, letting him see her hand, giving him the choice. When he didn't pull away, she gently touched his small shoulder, and then, without thinking, without planning, she began to sing. The melody was old, ancient even, passed down through generations of mothers to their children. A lullaby in Arabic that spoke of stars and safety, of love that transcended distance, of a mother's eternal protection. Layla's voice, unused for so long except for the most basic communication, unfurled like a flower that had been waiting for rain. It was pure and clear, carrying a warmth that seemed to wrap around the child like a blanket. The effect was immediate. Yusuf's crying stopped. His dark eyes, still wet with tears, fixed on Layla's face with wonder. Around them, the restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen noise seemed to have faded. There was only the voice, the song, the moment. Layla sang the first verse, then the second, her hand gently rubbing the boy's back in slow, soothing circles. She had sung this song before, years ago, to another little boy with dark eyes. She had sung it in a nursery decorated with stars, had sung it while rocking a chair by the window, had sung it on the last night before everything ended. The memory should have broken her, but instead it flowed through the music, adding layers of emotion that made the simple lullaby into something transcendent. By the time she reached the final notes, Yusuf was calm, his thumb in his mouth, his eyes drooping with exhaustion. Layla finished the song and slowly stood, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes on her, of the absolute silence in the restaurant. She kept her gaze down, embarrassed by the attention, already turning to leave. Wait! The single word, spoken in a voice she knew better than her own heartbeat, froze her in place. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the weight of absolute authority, the expectation of immediate obedience. Slowly, knowing she had no choice, Layla raised her eyes and looked directly at Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid for the first time in 3 years. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Shock? Recognition? Disbelief? His face had gone completely pale beneath his olive complexion. One hand gripped the edge of the table, so hard his knuckles were white. The other had risen halfway, as if reaching for something that couldn't possibly be real. That song, he said, his voice rough, speaking in English now, but with an accent that grew thicker with emotion. Where did you learn that song? Layla's mind raced. Deny. Deflect. Disappear. It's a common lullaby, sir. My grandmother taught me. I apologize if I overstepped. I'll send someone else to take your order. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her again. This time he spoke in Arabic, and the words made her blood run cold. Layla, look at me. Every person at the table turned to stare at Khalid, then at her. The restaurant remained silent, sensing drama even if they couldn't understand the language. Layla stood perfectly still, her back to him, every muscle in her body screaming at her to run. I don't know what you're talking about, sir. My name is Layla Bennett, and I'm your server this evening. If you'll excuse me. In one fluid movement, Khalid stood. She heard the chair scrape back, heard his footsteps, and then he was in front of her, blocking her path. Up close, she could see the changes 3 years had carved into his face. New lines around his eyes, silver threading through his beard that hadn't been there before. But those eyes, those dark, intense eyes that had once looked at her with such love, they were the same. Your voice, he said, speaking so quietly that only she could hear. I would know your voice anywhere, in any language, in any life. Layla, my Layla, how is this possible? She wanted to deny it, wanted to push past him and run. But she had forgotten how it felt to be the focus of Khalid's attention, how it was like standing in front of sun. There was nowhere to hide, no shadows deep enough to conceal her. I'm not who you think I am, she whispered. But even she could hear how weak the lie sounded. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to move away, and gently touched her cheek. The contact sent electricity through her entire body. His fingers were warm, familiar, and for one traitorous moment, she wanted to lean into that touch, to close her eyes and pretend that the last 3 years had never happened. You changed your hair, he said, his voice breaking. You're thinner, but your eyes... Layla, I have searched for you for 3 years. 3 years. I thought you were dead. I mourned you. And here you are, serving tables in New York, pretending to be someone else. Why? Why did you leave? Why did you let me believe you were gone? Tears burned in Layla's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of all these people. Not in front of him. You don't understand. You can't understand. Please, just let me go. Pretend you never saw me. Let you go? Khalid's voice rose slightly, drawing more attention. His assistants had stood now, uncertain whether to intervene. Layla, you are my wife. You disappeared without a trace. Do you have any idea what that did to me? To my family? We thought you had been kidnapped, or worse. And now I find you here alive, and you want to just walk away. I'm not your wife anymore, Layla said, finally finding her voice, finding her strength. She stepped back, breaking the contact between them. That woman died 3 years ago. I'm someone else now. Someone you don't know. Someone you never really knew. The words hit him like physical blows. She could see in the way he flinched, in the way his hand dropped to his side. What are you talking about? Layla, please, come with me. We'll go somewhere private. We'll talk. I'll listen to everything. Just, please, don't run for me again. David, the floor manager, appeared at her elbow, his face a mask of professional concern mixed with barely concealed panic. Is everything all right here? Layla, is this gentleman bothering you? It was almost funny. David, asking if a billionaire sheik was bothering his waitress, ready to defend her despite the obvious power imbalance. It was a kind of absurd moment that would have made her laugh if she wasn't so close to breaking down completely. Everything is fine, Khalid said smoothly, switching back to English, his composure returning like armor sliding into place. Ms. Bennett and I are old acquaintances. I was simply surprised to see her here. I apologize for causing a scene. He reached into his bisht and pulled out a wallet. Not just any wallet, but one made of black leather. So fine it probably cost more than Layla made in a month. From it, he extracted a business card and held it out to her. My hotel, the penthouse suite at the plaza. Please, come tonight after your shift. Or tomorrow, whenever you're ready. But please, Layla, we need to talk. There are things you don't know. Things that have happened since you left. I'm begging you. She had never heard Khalid beg for anything in his life. It was so unexpected, so unlike the proud, commanding man she had known, that she found herself taking the card before she could think better of it. I'll think about it, she heard herself say. It was the best she could offer, the most she could promise. Khalid seemed to understand that, because he nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face, as if he was trying to memorize every detail, afraid she might vanish again if he looked away. That's all I ask. Think about it. But know this, I'm not leaving New York until we talk. I'll wait as long as it takes. He returned to his table, spoke briefly to his assistants in rapid Arabic, and then the entire group stood. They were leaving, abandoning the best table in the restaurant without ordering a single thing. As they passed her, Khalid paused one more time. The song you sang to Yusuf, he said quietly. That was the song you sang to Amir. Every night. I used to stand outside his nursery door and listen to you. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I haven't heard it in 3 years. I didn't think I would ever hear it again. Thank you for reminding me that beauty still exists in this world. Then he was gone, sweeping out of the restaurant with his entourage, leaving Layla standing in the middle of the dining room with a business card clutched in her trembling hand, and the eyes of every customer and staff member boring into her. The spell broke. Conversation resumed. The kitchen noise returned. Life went on. But for Layla, everything had changed. The careful life she had built, the anonymity she had cultivated, the safety she had created, all of it had been shattered in the space of a single song. She looked down at the business card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid, CEO Al-Rashid Holdings. And below that, in his own handwriting, a phone number and 2 words in Arabic, Please, Habibti. My love. Layla closed her eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, she let herself remember, not just the pain and the loss and the betrayal, but the beginning, the way they had met at a charity gala in London, where she had been performing with a string quartet, and he had been the guest of honor, the way he had waited until the performance was over, and then approached her with a directness that should have been off-putting but was somehow charming. The way he had asked her to dinner, and then to another dinner, and then to fly to Paris for the weekend just to hear her play at a private concert. The way he had proposed after 6 months, presenting her with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, telling her that he had known from the first moment he heard her play that she was the one who would complete his life. The wedding in Dubai, attended by royalty and celebrities, a fairy tale come to life. The year of happiness that followed, of learning to navigate his world while maintaining her own identity, of falling deeper in love with a man who was both powerful and tender, commanding and gentle. And then Amir, their son, born with his father's eyes and his mother's smile. 2 years of perfect joy, of watching their child grow, of building a family. 2 years of believing that she had found her place in the world, that she belonged, that she was safe, until the day everything ended. Layla opened her eyes and looked at the card again. She should throw it away, should forget this ever happened, should disappear again, change her name again, start over in a new city where Khalid would never find her. But even as she thought it, she knew she wouldn't, because for 3 years she had been running. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop. She slipped the card into her apron pocket and returned to work. She had tables to serve, orders to take, a shift to finish. But in the back of her mind, a decision was forming, a terrifying, impossible, necessary decision. Tonight, after her shift ended, she would go to the plaza. She would face the man she had once loved more than life itself. And she would finally tell him the truth about why she had disappeared, about what had really happened the day their son died, about the betrayal that had destroyed her faith in everything she thought she knew. She would tell him about Rashid. And then, whatever happened next, at least she would finally be free of the secrets that had been slowly killing her for 3 years. The truth, she had learned, was a heavy burden, but lies were heavier still. And she was so very tired of carrying them alone. The Plaza Hotel stood like a monument to old-world elegance on Fifth Avenue, its French Renaissance architecture a stark contrast to the modern glass towers that surrounded it. Layla stood across the street, staring up at the illuminated windows, trying to gather the courage to cross the threshold. She had changed out of her uniform into jeans and a simple sweater, the nicest clothes she owned now, though they would have been considered casual to the point of insult in her old life. It was nearly midnight. Her shift had ended at 11, but she had spent the last hour walking the streets of Manhattan, trying to decide if she was really going to do this. A dozen times she had turned toward the subway that would take her back to her tiny apartment in Brooklyn. A dozen times she had turned back toward the plaza. The business card was still in her pocket, the edges soft now from being touched so many times. She pulled out one more time, reading the handwritten words. Please, Habibti, my love. Did he still think of her that way? After everything that had happened, after 3 years of silence, did he still love her? Or was this just about closure, about answers, about tying up loose ends before he moved on with his life? And did it matter? She wasn't here for reconciliation. She was here to tell him the truth, to make him understand why she had left, to finally unburden herself of the secret that had been eating her alive. What happened after that? She couldn't think that far ahead. Layla took a deep breath and crossed the street. The doorman opened the heavy glass door with a practiced smile, and she stepped into the lobby. It was like entering another world, all marble and gold, crystal chandeliers and fresh flowers, the kind of luxury that she had once taken for granted and now felt completely alien. She approached the front desk, where a young woman in a crisp uniform looked up with professional courtesy. Good evening. How may I help you? I'm here to see Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid. Penthouse suite. The woman's expression didn't change, but Layla saw the quick assessment in her eyes, taking the cheap clothes, the lack of jewelry, the obvious signs of someone who didn't belong in a place like this. Is the Sheikh expecting you? Yes. My name is Layla Bennett. The woman picked up a phone, spoke quietly into it, and then nodded. Someone will be down to escort you up. Please have a seat. Layla moved to one of the plush chairs in the lobby, but she couldn't sit. Her nerves were too frayed, her mind too chaotic. She paced instead, her sneakers silent on the marble floor, aware of the curious glances from the night staff. The elevator doors opened, and one of the men from the restaurant emerged, one of Khalid's assistants. He was younger than Khalid, perhaps in his early 30s, with sharp eyes and the kind of alert posture that suggested military training. A bodyguard, then not just an assistant. "Ms. Bennett," he said with a slight bow. "I'm Tariq. The Sheikh is waiting for you. Please follow me." They rode the elevator in silence. Layla watched the numbers climb, 10, 20, 30, 40, until finally they reached the top floor. The doors opened directly into a private foyer, and Tariq led her through double doors into the penthouse suite. It was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park and the Manhattan skyline, the city lights spreading out like a carpet of stars. The furnishings were elegant and expensive, but what caught Layla's attention was the man standing by the windows, his back to her, still wearing the white thobe from earlier, but without the bish now. "Thank you, Tariq. You can go," Khalid said without turning around. The bodyguard bowed and left, closing the doors behind him. Layla stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped in front of her to keep them from shaking, waiting. For a long moment, Khalid didn't move. Then, slowly, he turned to face her. In the soft lighting of the suite, she could see the toll the last 3 years had taken on him more clearly. He looked older, wearier, as if he had been carrying a weight that was slowly crushing him. "You came," he said, and there was such relief in his voice that it made her chest ache. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Layla admitted. "I've spent 3 years making sure you would never find me. Coming here goes against every instinct I have." "Then why did you—" "Because I'm tired, Khalid. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of carrying this alone. And because you deserve to know the truth, even if it changes nothing, even if you hate me after you hear it." He moved toward her then, crossing the space between them with quick strides. "Hate you? Layla, I could never hate you. I loved you. I love you still. You are my wife, the mother of my son, the other half of my soul. How could I ever hate you? You might, when you hear what I have to say." Khalid gestured to the seating area, a cluster of sofas and chairs arranged around a coffee table. "Then sit. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning or the end or anywhere in between. Just talk to me, please." Layla sat, perching on the edge of a sofa, her body tense and ready to flee. Khalid sat across from her, leaning forward, his hands clasped between his knees, his entire attention focused on her with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. Where to begin? How to explain 3 years of pain and fear and loss in a way that would make sense? Layla closed her eyes, reaching back into memories she had tried so hard to bury, and began to speak. "Do you remember the day Amir died?" Khalid flinched as if she had struck him. "Every second of it. It's burned into my mind. I will never forget." "Then you remember that I was supposed to be with him, that I was supposed to take him to the park that afternoon. But I had a meeting at Juilliard. They were offering me a position as head of the music therapy program. It was a huge opportunity, something I had been working toward for years. You told me to go, that Amir would be fine with the nanny." "Amira," Khalid said. "She had been with us for 6 months. She came highly recommended. She had excellent references." "References that were forged," Layla said, opening her eyes to look at him. "Amira wasn't a nanny. She was an actress, hired to play a role, hired by her cousin Rashid." The name hung in the air between them like poison. Khalid's expression went from confusion to disbelief to a dawning horror. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Amir's death was an accident. The car crash, the brake failure, it was all planned. Rashid wanted you to suffer, wanted to destroy your family, wanted to take everything from you. And he knew that the best way to hurt you was through me and Amir." Khalid stood abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. "That's impossible. Rashid is family. He's ambitious, yes, and we've had our disagreements, but he would never, he couldn't." "He could. He did." Layla's voice was steady now, the words she had rehearsed 1,000 times in her mind finally being spoken aloud. "After the crash, after Amir died, I was destroyed. You know that. You saw me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't function. But even through the grief, Something didn't make sense. The police said the brakes had failed, but the car was new. It had been serviced just weeks before. And Amira, she survived the crash with barely a scratch. But Amir, in his car seat directly behind her, died on impact. How was that possible? The investigation concluded it was a tragic accident, Khalid said, but his voice lacked conviction now. The investigation was closed before it really began, because Rashid made sure of it. He paid off the investigators, buried the evidence, made it all go away. But I couldn't let it go. I started asking questions. I hired a private investigator with money I had saved from before we were married. And what he found? Layla's voice broke, and she had to pause to collect herself. What he found was that Rashid had been planning this for months. He had hired Amira, had her sabotage the car, had arranged for her to walk away while our son died. And then he made sure that I would be blamed. Blamed? What are you talking about? Your family, Layla said, and now the bitterness crept into her voice. They never accepted me, Khalid. You know that. I was an outsider, a Western woman, someone who didn't understand your culture or your traditions. They tolerated me because you loved me, but they never wanted me there. And after Amir died, Rashid made sure they knew that it was my fault, that if I had been with him instead of pursuing my career, he would still be alive, that I had chosen ambition over my son. Khalid sank back onto the sofa, his face ashen. I never believed that. I never blamed you. Didn't you? Layla's eyes met his, and in them, he saw the depth of her pain. You said you didn't, but I saw the doubt in your eyes. I heard the whispers from your mother, your brothers, your cousins. And when I tried to tell you what I had discovered, when I tried to show you the evidence my investigator had found, you told me I was being paranoid, that grief was making me see conspiracies where there were none, that I needed to accept what had happened and move on. I was trying to protect you, Khalid said desperately. You were falling apart. I thought if you kept digging into the accident, it would destroy you completely. I thought I was helping. You chose them over me, Layla said simply. When I needed you to believe me, to stand with me, to fight for the truth, you chose your family instead. And I realized that I would never be truly part of that family, that when it mattered most, I would always be the outsider. So I left. You disappeared, without a word, without a trace. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I thought you had killed yourself. I thought the grief had been too much, and you had ended your life. I searched for you everywhere. I hired investigators, offered rewards, contacted every agency I could think of, and there was nothing. It was like you had vanished from the face of the earth. I had to, Layla said, because the investigator I hired, he died. Car accident, they said. Brake failure. Just like Amir. And I knew that if I stayed, if I kept pushing, I would be next. Rashid had already taken my son. I wasn't going to let him take my life, too. The silence that followed was deafening. Khalid sat with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. When he finally looked up, there were tears on his face. The first time Layla had ever seen him cry. I failed you, he said, his voice raw. I failed you and I failed Amir. I should have listened. I should have believed you. I should have protected you both. And instead, I let Rashid destroy our family. How can you ever forgive me? I don't know if I can, Layla said honestly. I've spent 3 years trying to forgive you, trying to understand, trying to move on. But every time I close my eyes, I see Amir's face. I hear his laugh. I remember the way he would reach for me when he was scared or tired. And I remember that he died because I wasn't there, because I chose a meeting over being with him, because I trusted the wrong people. That guilt, it never goes away. Khalid crossed to her then, dropping to his knees in front of the sofa, taking her hands in his. It wasn't your fault. None of it was your fault. It was Rashid's. And mine. But not yours. Never yours. You were a wonderful mother. Amir loved you more than anything in this world. And he would not want you to carry this guilt. How do you know what he would want? Layla's voice rose, years of suppressed emotion finally breaking through. He was 2 years old, Khalid. He barely had time to want anything. He barely had time to live. And now he's gone and we can't ask him, and we can't bring him back, and nothing we do will ever change that. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with sobs that she had held back for so long. And Khalid, still kneeling before her, pulled her into his arms and held her while she broke apart. He didn't try to shush her or tell her it would be okay. He just held her, his own tears falling into her hair, and let her grieve in a way she hadn't been able to for 3 years. They stayed like that for a long time. Two people who had loved and lost, who had been torn apart by tragedy and betrayal, finding a moment of shared pain that was somehow also a moment of healing. When Layla finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, but she felt lighter somehow, as if speaking the truth aloud, finally sharing the burden she had carried alone, had lifted some of the weight from her shoulders. What happened to the evidence? Khalid asked quietly. The evidence your investigator found before he died? I have it. Copies of everything. I've kept it safe for 3 years, moving it every time I moved, never letting it out of my sight. Bank records showing payments from Rashid to Amira, emails discussing the plan, photographs of them meeting, even a recording of a phone conversation where Rashid talks about taking care of the Al-Rashid problem. It's all there. Everything you would need to prove what he did. Why didn't you go to the police? Because Rashid has connections everywhere. In Dubai and London, even here in New York. I was afraid that if I went to the authorities, the evidence would disappear and I would end up dead. So I kept it hidden, kept myself hidden, and waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe for enough time to pass that Rashid would think I was really gone. Maybe for the courage to finally do something with what I knew. Or maybe... She looked at Khalid. Really looked at him, seeing past the sheik and the billionaire to the man she had once loved. Maybe I was waiting for you to find me. Khalid stood, pacing to the windows, his mind clearly racing. Rashid is in New York. He arrived 2 days ago. He's staying at the Mandarin Oriental. Layla felt her blood run cold. He's here? Why? Business, supposedly. But now I wonder. Layla, when I saw you tonight at the restaurant, I was shocked, but I was also relieved, grateful, overjoyed. I didn't think about who else might have seen you, who else might have been watching. If Rashid finds out you're alive, if he knows you have evidence against him, he'll try to kill me. Again. Layla finished the thought, her voice surprisingly calm. I know. I've been living with that knowledge for 3 years. It's why I've been so careful, why I changed my name, why I work for cash and don't have social media and avoid cameras. But if he's here, if he's close, maybe it's time to stop hiding. What are you saying? Layla stood, moving to stand beside him at the window, looking out at the city that had been her refuge and her prison. I'm saying that I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting Rashid win. He took our son from us. He destroyed our marriage. He stole 3 years of our lives. And for what? Power? Money? Revenge for some perceived slight? Whatever his reasons, I'm done letting him control my life. We'll go to the authorities, Khalid said firmly. We'll give them the evidence. We'll make sure he pays for what he did. It's not that simple. Rashid has lawyers, connections, money. He'll fight it. He'll claim the evidence is forged, that I'm a grieving mother who has lost her mind, that this is all some elaborate revenge plot. And without the original investigator to testify, without Amira, who has probably disappeared or been paid off, it becomes my word against his. Then what do you suggest? A plan was forming in Layla's mind, dangerous and risky, but possibly the only way to get real justice. We make him confess. We get him to admit what he did, on record, in a way that can't be denied or explained away. How? By giving him what he wants. By making him think he's won. Layla turned to face Khalid, and in her eyes he saw a determination that reminded him of the woman he had fallen in love with, strong, intelligent, fearless. We let him know I'm alive. We let him think I'm vulnerable, alone, without protection. And when he comes for me, we'll be ready. Absolutely not. Khalid said immediately, I'm not using you as bait. It's too dangerous. It's the only way. You know it is. Rashid is too careful, too protected. We need him to make a mistake, to reveal himself. And he will... if he thinks he has the chance to eliminate the one person who can expose him. And if something goes wrong, if he succeeds, Layla, I just got you back. I can't lose you again. I won't. She reached up, touching his face gently, feeling the familiar roughness of his beard under her palm. You won't lose me, because this time I won't be alone. This time I'll have you, and together we'll make sure that Rashid pays for what he did to our son. Khalid covered her hand with his own, closing his eyes at the contact. I don't deserve your trust. Not after I failed you so completely. Maybe not, but I'm giving it to you anyway. Because despite everything, despite the pain and the anger and the years apart, I still... She paused, the words catching in her throat. I still love you, Khalid. I never stopped. And I think that's why I ran. Because loving you and losing you was more than I could bear. He opened his eyes, and in them, she saw everything she'd been afraid to hope for: love, regret, determination, and a fierce protectiveness that made her feel, for the first time in 3 years, truly safe. I love you too, he said. I have loved you from the moment I first heard you play, and I will love you until my last breath. And I swear to you, on Amir's memory, that I will not fail you again. We will bring Rashid to justice. We will make him pay for what he did. And then, if you'll let me, I will spend the rest of my life making up for the time we lost. Layla smiled, a real smile, the first and longer than she could remember. One step at a time. First, we deal with Rashid. Then we figure out the rest. Agreed. But tonight, just for tonight, can we pretend that the last 3 years didn't happen? Can we just be Khalid and Layla, two people who love each other, without all the pain and complications? In answer, Layla leaned forward and kissed him. It was tentative at first, both of them uncertain after so long apart. But then muscle memory took over, and it was like coming home. Khalid's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and Layla let herself sink into the embrace, into the familiar scent of him, into the feeling of being held by someone who knew her completely. They stood there by the window, the city lights twinkling below them, two broken people finding their way back to each other. It wasn't a happy ending. There was still too much pain, too much to resolve, too much danger ahead. But it was a beginning, and sometimes that was enough. Tomorrow they would plan. They would strategize. They would set their trap for Rashid and pray that it worked. But tonight, they would simply hold each other and remember what it felt like to not be alone. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, unaware and uncaring of the drama playing out in the penthouse suite of the Plaza Hotel. But for Layla and Khalid, the world had shifted. The past had caught up with the present, and the future, uncertain as it was, suddenly held possibilities that hadn't existed before. And in a hotel across town, Rashid Al-Zahir sat in his own suite, scrolling through his phone, completely unaware that the woman he thought he had destroyed 3 years ago was alive, was planning, and was coming for him. The game had changed, and this time Layla intended to win. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long shadows across the room. Layla woke slowly, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar surroundings. She was on the sofa, covered with a cashmere blanket that hadn't been there when she'd fallen asleep. Across the room, Khalid sat at a desk, already dressed in a fresh thobe, speaking quietly into his phone in Arabic. She watched him for a moment, this man who had once been her entire world. In the harsh light of morning, the fantasy of the night before seemed fragile, impossible. They had held each other, had talked until exhaustion claimed them both, had made promises that felt real in the darkness. But now, with the sun rising over Manhattan, reality reasserted itself. They weren't just two people in love. They were two people with a dangerous enemy, a murdered child between them, and 3 years of pain that couldn't be erased with a single night of reconciliation. Khalid ended his call and turned, his face softening when he saw she was awake. "Good morning. I hope I didn't wake you." "No, what time is it?" 7:30. "I ordered breakfast. It should be here soon." He crossed to her, sitting on the edge of the coffee table. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Layla admitted. "Last night, in the dark, everything seemed possible. But now I'm wondering if I made a terrible mistake. If coming here, telling you everything, planning to go after Rashid. It's all just going to end in disaster. It won't. I won't let it. Khalid's voice was firm, certain. I've already started making arrangements. I have people I trust, truly trust, looking into Rashid's activities here in New York. Where he's staying, who he's meeting with, what his schedule looks like. We'll know his movements before he makes them. He's not stupid, Khalid. If he senses a trap, he won't, because we're going to give him exactly what he expects to see. A frightened woman, alone and vulnerable. A husband who doesn't know the truth. We'll play our parts perfectly, and he'll walk right into our hands. A knock at the door interrupted them. Tarek entered, followed by hotel staff wheeling in carts laden with breakfast, fresh fruit, pastries, eggs, Arabic coffee, and mint tea. The staff set everything up efficiently and left, and Layla found herself staring at the spread with a mixture of hunger and nausea. You need to eat, Khalid said gently, pouring her tea. You're too thin. When was the last time you had a proper meal? I eat, Layla said defensively, but even she could hear how weak the protest sounded. The truth was, she had been surviving on whatever was cheapest and quickest for 3 years. Ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, the occasional staff meal at the restaurant. Nothing like the feast spread before her now. She forced herself to eat, and once she started, she realized how hungry she actually was. Khalid watched her with satisfaction, occasionally adding more food to her plate when she wasn't looking. I need to go home, Layla said between bites. To my apartment. I have the evidence there hidden, and I need to change clothes, figure out what to do about work. You're not going back to that restaurant, Khalid said firmly. It's not safe. If Rashid has people watching, if he knows you're alive, then me suddenly disappearing will only confirm that I have something to hide. No, I need to maintain my routine, at least for now. Act like nothing has changed. That's what will keep me safe. I don't like it. You don't have to like it, but it's my decision. Layla met his eyes, and in that moment, she saw him recognize that she wasn't the same woman who had left 3 years ago. She had been broken and rebuilt, and the person who had emerged was harder, more independent, less willing to simply accept his protection without question. Then I'm assigning you security. Discreet but present. Tarek and 2 others. They'll watch you, keep you safe, and you won't even know they're there. It was a compromise, and Layla knew it was the best she would get. Fine, but they stay back. I can't have obvious bodyguards following a waitress around Brooklyn. It would raise too many questions. Agreed. Khalid pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. Tarek will coordinate everything. Now, about the evidence. I want to see it. All of it. And then we need to make copies, store them in multiple secure locations. If something happens to the originals... I've already done that, Layla interrupted. I'm not an idiot, Khalid. I have copies in 3 different safety deposit boxes, in 3 different banks, under 3 different names. If something happens to me, my lawyer has instructions to release everything to the media and the authorities. Khalid stared at her with something like awe. You've been planning this for 3 years. I've been surviving for 3 years. There's a difference. Layla finished her tea and stood. I need to go. My shift starts at 11, and I have things to do before then. Let me send you in a car at least. No, I take the subway. That's what Layla Bennett does. That's who I have to be until we're ready to make our move. She paused, then added more softly. But thank you for breakfast, for listening, for everything. Khalid stood as well, closing the distance between them. When this is over, when Rashid is in prison where he belongs, we need to talk. Really talk. About us, about what we want, about whether there's a way forward. I know, but one crisis at a time. Layla reached up, straightening his guttura in a gesture that was achingly familiar, a remnant of their old life together. Be careful, Khalid. Rashid is dangerous. Don't underestimate him. I won't. And Layla, the same goes for you. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't take unnecessary risks. I promise. She kissed him quickly, then pulled away before she could change her mind about leaving. I'll call you tonight, after my shift. Tarek appeared as if summoned, ready to escort her down. As Layla left the penthouse, she felt Khalid's eyes on her back, felt the weight of his worry and his love. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like pressure, like expectation, like the beginning of losing herself again in someone else's life. But that was a problem for another day. Today, she had to focus on staying alive long enough to bring Rashid to justice. Everything else would have to wait. The subway ride back to Brooklyn gave Layla time to think, to plan, to prepare herself for what came next. She was hyper-aware of her surroundings now, looking for faces that appeared more than once, for people who seemed too interested in her movements. Was that man in the business suit one of Khalid's security team? Or was he one of Rashid's watchers? The woman with the stroller, innocent mother, or trained operative? Paranoia, Layla knew, was both a survival tool and a poison. Too little, and you missed the danger. Too much, and you saw threats everywhere, even where none existed. Finding the balance was exhausting. Her apartment was a fifth-floor walk-up in a building that had seen better days. The lock on the front door was broken more often than it was fixed, and the hallway smelled like a combination of cooking spices and mildew. But it was cheap, it was anonymous, and it was hers. Layla climbed the stairs quickly, her keys already in her hand, and let herself into the tiny studio that had been her sanctuary for the past year. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The Murphy bed folded up against the wall. The small kitchenette with its ancient refrigerator and two-burner stove. The single window that looked out onto a brick wall. It was depressing and claustrophobic, and she had never been so happy to see it. Layla went immediately to the closet, pushing aside the few clothes she owned to reveal a loose floorboard. She pried it up carefully, reaching into the space beneath to pull out a waterproof bag. Inside was a USB drive, a burner phone, and a thick envelope of documents. This was her insurance policy, her weapon, her proof. She had memorized every word on every page, but she still felt better having it in her hands. She was replacing the floorboard when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong, a creak in the hallway outside her door. The building was old and noisy, but Layla had learned its rhythms over the past year. She knew which boards creaked when her neighbors came home, knew the sound of the couple upstairs arguing, knew the pattern of footsteps that meant the mail carrier was making deliveries. This was different. This was someone trying to be quiet, someone who didn't belong. Layla's heart began to race. She moved silently to the door, pressing her ear against it, listening. Another creak, closer now, and then the unmistakable sound of someone testing her doorknob, try to see if it was locked. She had seconds to make a decision. The fire escape was outside her window, but getting to it would mean crossing a room in full view of anyone who broke through the door. Her phone was in her purse, across the room. The evidence was in her hands. But what good would it do if she was dead? The doorknob stopped moving. Silence. Had they left? Or were they picking the lock? Layla made her choice. She moved quickly to the window, unlocking it as quietly as she could, pushing it open. The fire escape was rusty and probably not entirely safe, but it was better than being trapped. She climbed out. The waterproof bag clutched to her chest, just as she heard the unmistakable sound of her door being kicked in. She didn't look back. She climbed down the fire escape as fast as she dared, the metal groaning under her weight. Behind her, she heard shouting, heard footsteps in her apartment. They would be at the window in seconds. Layla reached the third floor and made a split-second decision. Instead of continuing down, she went sideways, climbing through an open window into someone else's apartment. An elderly woman sat in a wheelchair, watching TV, and nearly had a heart attack when Layla tumbled through her window. "I'm so sorry," Layla gasped. "Please don't scream. I'm being chased. Bad people. Please." The woman stared at her with wide eyes, then, to Layla's eternal gratitude, nodded toward the door. "Go. Quickly. I'll tell them I didn't see anything." Layla didn't wait to be told twice. She ran through the apartment, out into the hallway, and down the stairs, taking them two at a time. She could hear shouting above her, could hear footsteps on the fire escape. They were coming. She burst out of the building onto the street, nearly colliding with a man in a dark suit who seemed to appear out of nowhere. Layla screamed, "Try to dodge," but he caught her arm. "Mrs. Al-Rashid, it's okay. I'm with Tariq. You're safe." Layla looked up into the face of one of Khalid's security team, and the relief was so intense she nearly collapsed. "My apartment. Someone broke in. They're still there." The man spoke rapidly into a concealed microphone, and within seconds, 2 more men appeared. One stayed with Layla, while the other 2 entered the building. She stood on the sidewalk, shaking, clutching the waterproof bag, trying to process what had just happened. Her phone rang. "Khalid." She answered with trembling hands. "Layla, thank God. Tariq just contacted me. Are you hurt?" "No, I'm okay. I got out in time." "But Khalid." "They knew where I lived. They came for me. If I had been 5 minutes slower." I know. Listen to me. You're not going back there. Ever. Tariq is bringing you back to the plaza. We'll get your things later, under guard. Right now, I just need you safe. The evidence. You have it." "Yes. I grabbed it before I ran." "Good. That's good. Just come back. Please. Let me protect you." Layla wanted to argue, wanted to insist on her independence, but the truth was she was terrified. Someone had found her. Despite all her precautions, all her careful anonymity, they had found her, and if they had found her once, they could find her again. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'm coming back." By the time Layla returned to the plaza, Khalid had transformed the penthouse into a command center. Laptops were set up on the dining table, displaying security feeds and documents. Tariq and 3 other men were present, speaking in low voices, coordinating. Khalid himself was on the phone, his voice hard and commanding, speaking in rapid Arabic. He ended the call when he saw her and crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. "Are you sure you're okay? You're not hurt?" "I'm fine. Shaken, but fine." Layla pulled back, holding up the waterproof bag. "I got the evidence. That's what matters. What matters is that you're alive." Khalid's voice was fierce. "The evidence is useless if you're dead. Do you understand that? Nothing is worth your life. Nothing." One of the security team approached, holding a tablet. "Sheikh, we have identification on the men who broke into Ms. Bennett's apartment. They're private contractors, former military. They've worked for the Al-Zahir family before." Khalid's expression went cold. "Rashid, he knows she's alive. He must have had people watching the restaurant last night, or someone on his payroll saw us together. Damn it, I should have been more careful." "This isn't your fault," Layla said. "And actually, this might work in our favor. If Rashid is making moves this quickly, this desperately, it means he's scared. It means he knows I'm a threat. We can use that." "Use it how?" "By putting you in more danger." Khalid shook his head. "No, we're going to the authorities now. We'll give them the evidence, let them handle Rashid." "And what will they do?" Layla challenged. "Rashid has lawyers, connections, money. He'll claim the evidence is fabricated, that I'm a mentally unstable woman with a grudge. Without a confession or a witness, it's not enough. You know it's not enough." Tariq spoke up from across the room. "She's right. Sheikh, I've been reviewing the evidence. It's compelling, but it's circumstantial. Bank transfers could be explained away. Emails could be claimed as forgeries. The recording is unclear, doesn't explicitly mention names or crimes. A good lawyer could create reasonable doubt. Then what do you suggest?" Khalid demanded, frustration evident in every line of his body. Layla took a deep breath. "We stick to the original plan. We make Rashid think he's won. We make him think I'm vulnerable, that I'm alone, that he has a chance to eliminate me and the evidence. And when he makes his move, we'll be ready. We'll record everything. Get him to confess. Make it impossible for him to deny. It's too dangerous. It's the only way." Layla moved to the table, opening the waterproof bag and spreading out the contents. "Look at this. Really look at it. This is 3 years of my life. 3 years of hiding, of being afraid, of living half a life because I was too scared to seek justice for our son. I'm done being afraid. Khalid, I'm done letting Rashid win. So we're going to do this. The only question is whether you're going to help me, or if I'm going to do it alone." The room fell silent. Every man present was looking at Khalid, waiting for his decision. Layla held her breath, knowing that this was a moment that would define everything that came next. Finally, Khalid spoke. "If we do this, we do it my way. Full security, controlled environment, multiple backup plans. And at the first sign that something is going wrong, we abort. Agreed? Agreed. Then let's plan." Khalid gestured to the table, and everyone gathered around. "Tark, I want a full workup on Rashid's security detail. Numbers, capabilities, weaknesses. Find out where he's most vulnerable. Layla, walk us through the evidence. Everything you have, everything you know, we need to understand exactly what we're working with." For the next several hours, they planned. Layla explained every piece of evidence, every connection she had discovered, every detail of Rashid's plot. Khalid's security team analyzed Rashid's patterns, his schedule, his vulnerabilities. They discussed locations, timing, technology, how to lure Rashid in, how to record him, how to ensure Layla's safety, while still making her appear vulnerable enough to be a target. It was exhausting and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. For 3 years, Layla had been alone with her knowledge, her fear, her plans. Now, she had a team. She had resources. She had Khalid. And for the first time since Amir's death, she felt like justice might actually be possible. As evening approached, the team dispersed to handle various tasks. Tariq went to coordinate with additional security personnel. The tech specialist went to acquire recording equipment. The others went to scout locations and gather intelligence on Rashid's movements. Finally, Layla and Khalid were alone again. She stood by the windows, looking out at the city as it transitioned from day to night, millions of lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. "Are you sure about this?" Khalid asked, coming to stand beside her. "It's not too late to change your mind. We could leave. Tonight, go somewhere Rashid can't find us. Start over. And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, wondering when he'll find us?" "No." Layla shook her head. "This ends now. One way or another." "You become so strong," Khalid said softly. "Stronger than I ever was. I'm in awe of you, Layla. And I'm ashamed that I wasn't there when you needed me, that I didn't believe you when you tried to tell me the truth. You were grieving too. You were in pain. People make mistakes when they're in pain. That's generous of you. More generous than I deserve." He reached out, taking her hand. "When this is over, I want to make things right between us. I want to earn back your trust, your love. I want to be the man you thought I was when you married me. And what if that man never really existed? What if he was just a fantasy, a dream I created because I wanted so badly to believe in fairy tales? Then I'll become him. I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you, because losing you once nearly destroyed me. I won't survive losing you again." Layla turned to face him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the love that had never really died despite everything that had happened. "One step at a time, Khalid. First, we deal with Rashid. Then we figure out if there's an us to salvage. That's all I ask. A chance. That's all I need." She squeezed his hand, then let go, needing the distance to think clearly. "I should call the restaurant. Tell them I won't be coming in for a few days. Make up some excuse. Tell them you quit. You're never going back there, Layla. After this is over, you'll never have to serve tables or hide who you are again. And who am I exactly? I'm not sure I know anymore. I'm not the woman I was before Mir died, but I'm not really Layla Bennett either. That was just a mask, a role I played to survive. So who am I now? You're the woman who survived the impossible, who lost everything and still found the strength to keep going. Who's about to bring down one of the most powerful men in the Middle East? You're extraordinary, Layla. You always were. You just forgot for a while." His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for so long. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had forgotten who she was in the grief and the fear. Maybe it was time to remember. "Okay," she said. "Let's do this. Let's bring Rashid down. And then we'll see what's left of us when the dust settles. Khalid smiled, and for the first time since she'd seen him in the restaurant, it reached his eyes. That's all I can ask for. That's more than I deserve. They stood together at the window as night fell over Manhattan. Two people preparing for battle. Two people hoping for redemption. Two people who had loved and lost and might, just might, find their way back to each other. But first, they had a monster to face. And this time, they would face him together. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Tariq entered the penthouse with his tablet, his expression grim. "Sheikh, we have a problem. Rashid is leaving New York. His flight is scheduled for tomorrow evening. If we're going to make our move, it has to be today." Khalid swore in Arabic. "That doesn't give us enough time. We're not ready." "Then we make ourselves ready," Layla said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "What's our best option? Where is he most vulnerable?" Tariq pulled up a schedule on his tablet. "He has a meeting this afternoon at 3 o'clock. A private art gallery in Chelsea. He's viewing pieces for his collection. The gallery will be closed to the public for his visit. Small security detail. He's trying to keep a low profile." "That's our window," Layla said immediately. "A private location, limited security, and he won't be expecting us to move so quickly." "It's too rush," Khalid protested. "We haven't had time to properly prepare, to set up recording equipment, to plan contingencies." "We don't have time for perfect," Layla interrupted. "We have time for good enough, and this is good enough. Tariq, can you get recording equipment set up in the gallery before the meeting?" "If we move fast, yes. I have contacts in the security industry. We can get cameras and microphones installed within a few hours." "Then do it." Layla turned to Khalid. "You need to call Rashid. Tell him you want to meet. Tell him you discovered that I'm alive, that I've been in contact with you, that you need his advice on how to handle the situation. He'll be suspicious. Of course he will, but he'll also be curious. And arrogant. He'll think he can manipulate you, can control the situation. That arrogance is what will bring him down." Khalid studied her face, seeing the determination there, the courage that had carried her through 3 years of hell. "You're sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Then we do it. Tariq, make the arrangements. I'll call Rashid." Khalid pulled out his phone, then paused. "Layla, I need you to promise me something. If this goes wrong, if there's any danger, you run. You don't try to be a hero. You don't take risks. You just run, and you let my security team handle it. Promise me." "I promise." The lie came easily. They both knew that if it came down to it, she wouldn't run. She couldn't, not when she was as close to justice for Amir. But Khalid needed to hear it, so she said it. And he needed to believe it, so he did. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Tariq and his team descended on the art gallery, posing as technicians upgrading the security system. They installed tiny cameras in the corners, microphones hidden in the artwork, recording equipment that would capture every word, every gesture. The gallery owner, persuaded by a combination of money and Khalid's influence, agreed to cooperate fully. Meanwhile, Khalid made the call to Rashid. Layla listened from across the room, her heart pounding as she heard Khalid's voice take on a tone of confusion and distress. "Rashid, cousin, I need your advice. Something impossible has happened. Layla, my Layla, she's alive. She contacted me. She's here in New York. I don't understand how this is possible. I don't know what to do." She couldn't hear Rashid's response, but she could see Khalid's face, could see the disgust and anger he was working hard to conceal. Whatever Rashid was saying, it was clearly calculated to manipulate, to control. "Yes, I know. You're right. I need to think clearly. Can we meet this afternoon? I know you're busy, but I really need someone I can trust to help me figure this out. The gallery? Yes, that works. 3 o'clock. Thank you, cousin. I don't know what I'd do without your guidance." He ended the call and immediately looked like he wanted to throw the phone across the room. He's coming. And he's already planting seeds, suggesting that Layla might be dangerous, might be unstable, that I need to be careful. He's setting up his narrative in case he needs to justify whatever he's planning to do. Did he sound surprised? That I'm alive? No. which confirms that he already knew. He's been tracking you, Layla, probably since the moment I saw you at the restaurant. He knew we would reconnect. He's been planning his next move. Then it's good we're forcing his hand, making him act before he's ready. Layla checked her watch. We have 4 hours. What I need to do? You need to stay here where it's safe. Tariq and I will handle the meeting with Rashid. Absolutely not. I need to be there. He needs to see me, to react to me. That's what will make him reveal himself. It's too dangerous. Khalid, we've been over this. I'm not a fragile flower that needs to be protected. I'm a woman who has survived 3 years of hell, and I'm going to see this through. I'm going to look Rashid in the eye when he realizes he's lost. I've earned that right. They stared at each other, wills clashing, until finally Khalid sighed. You'll wear a wire. You'll have security within arm's reach at all times. And at the first sign of danger, I run. I know. We've established this. Layla softened her tone. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But we can do this. Together. Together, Khalid echoed. And in that word was a promise, a commitment, a hope for something beyond this moment. The art gallery was a converted warehouse in Chelsea, all exposed brick and polished concrete floors. Massive canvases hung on the walls. Abstract pieces that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Layla stood in the center of the main room, her heart racing, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. She was wearing clothes that Khalid had delivered, designer jeans, a silk blouse, expensive boots. Her hair was down, styled in soft waves. She wore minimal makeup, but enough to highlight her features. She looked like herself again, or at least like the woman she used to be. Not a waitress, not Layla Bennett, but Layla Al-Rashid, wife of a sheikh, mother of a lost son, woman seeking justice. Khalid stood near the windows, apparently studying a painting, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Tariq and 2 other security personnel were positioned around the gallery, dressed as gallery staff. The owner had been sent away for the afternoon. Everything was in place. At exactly 3 o'clock, the door opened. Rashid Al-Zayer entered, and Layla felt her breath catch. She hadn't seen him in 3 years, but he looked exactly the same. Tall, handsome in a sharp-featured way, with cold eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, Italian leather shoes, a watch that cost more than a car. He looked successful, powerful, untouchable. He looked like a man who had gotten away with murder. Khalid, my cousin, Rashid said warmly, crossing to embrace Khalid in the traditional way. Thank you for meeting me. I came as soon as I could. This situation with Layla, it's quite extraordinary. Yes, Khalid said, his voice carefully neutral. Extraordinary is one word for it. Rashid's eyes swept the gallery, and then they landed on Layla. For just a moment, his mask slipped. She saw shock, then calculation, then something that looked almost like fear, but was gone in an instant, replaced by an expression of delighted surprise. Layla, my dear cousin, I can hardly believe it. We all thought you were dead. Where have you been? What happened to you? He moved toward her, arms outstretched as if to embrace her. Layla stepped back, her voice cold. Don't touch me, Rashid. Don't you dare touch me. He stopped, his arms dropping, his expression shifting to one of hurt confusion. I don't understand. Layla, what's wrong? We've all been so worried about you. Your disappearance devastated the family. And Khalid, he's been lost without you. Have you? Layla asked, her voice sharp. Been worried? Or have you been relieved? Thinking that you'd finally gotten rid of the problem. Thinking that you'd won. I don't know what you're talking about. Rashid looked at Khalid. Cousin, what is she saying? Has something happened? Is she well? It was a masterful performance. The concerned family member, the confused innocent. If Layla hadn't known the truth, she might have believed him. She's perfectly well, Khalid said, his voice hard. And she has some interesting things to tell us. Things about Amir's death. Things about you. Rashid's expression didn't change, but Layla saw his hand clench briefly at his side. About me? What could I possibly have to do with that tragedy? It was an accident. A terrible, heartbreaking accident. It wasn't an accident. Layla said, stepping forward now, her fear transforming into anger. You killed him. You hired someone to sabotage our car. You paid Amira to make sure she survived while my son died. You murdered a 2-year-old child because you wanted power, because you wanted to hurt Khalid, because you're a monster. That's insane, Rashid said, but his voice had lost some of its warmth. Layla, I understand that you're grieving, that you're looking for someone to blame, but these accusations are... I have proof, Layla interrupted. Bank records showing payments from you to Amira. Emails discussing the plan. A recording of you talking about taking care of the Al-Rashid problem. I have everything, Rashid. Everything I need to destroy you. The gallery fell silent. Rashid stood perfectly still, his mind clearly racing, calculating his options. When he spoke again, his voice was different, colder. The mask was slipping. If you had proof, you would have gone to the authorities 3 years ago. You would have exposed me then. But you didn't, because you don't have proof. You have theories, suspicions, the paranoid delusions of a grieving mother who can't accept that sometimes terrible things just happen. I didn't go to the authorities because I was afraid, Layla said, because you had connections, power, resources, because my investigator ended up dead, another convenient accident. But I'm not afraid anymore, Rashid, and I'm not alone. Khalid knows the truth now, and together we're going to make sure you pay for what you did. Rashid laughed, but there was no humor in it. Khalid? You think Khalid will choose you over his family? Over his own blood? He didn't believe you 3 years ago. What makes you think he believes you now? Because I do, Khalid said, moving to stand beside Layla. I believe every word she said, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting that I didn't believe her sooner. But I believe her now, and I'm going to make sure that you answer for Amir's death. For the first time, genuine emotion crossed Rashid's face. Anger. You're a fool, Khalid. You always have been. Soft, weak, letting a Western woman twist you around her finger. Amir was weak too. Half Western. Not a true Al-Rashid. The family is better off without him. The words hung in the air like poison. Layla felt Khalid tense beside her, felt the rage rolling off him in waves. But before he could move, before he could do something that would ruin everything, she spoke. Say that again, she said softly. Say it again, Rashid. Tell us how you really feel about Amir, about what you did. Rashid's eyes narrowed. He was smart enough to realize he'd made a mistake, revealed too much. But he was also arrogant enough to think he could still control the situation. It doesn't matter what I say. You have no proof, no witnesses, nothing that would stand up in court. And even if you did, do you really think you can touch me? I have lawyers, connections, resources that you can't even imagine. I could make you both disappear, and no one would ever find the bodies. Is that a threat? Khalid asked, his voice deadly quiet. It's a promise. Rashid's mask was completely gone now, revealing the cold, calculating monster beneath. You should have stayed disappeared, Layla. You should have stayed dead. Because now that I know you're alive, now that I know you're a threat, I'm going to have to fix that mistake. And this time, I'll make sure there's no coming back. You killed Amir, Layla said, needing to hear him say it, needing the confession to be complete. You sabotaged the car. You hired Amira. You murdered my son. Our son, Khalid added, his voice breaking. Rashid looked between them, and then he smiled. It was the most chilling thing Layla had ever seen. Yes, I did, and I'd do it again. Because the Al-Rashid family doesn't need weak blood, doesn't need Western contamination. Khalid should have married within our culture, should have had strong sons who understood our ways. Instead, he married you and produced that half-breed child. I did the family a favor. The confession hung in the air. Layla felt tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of vindication, of 3 years of pain finally finding validation. You're a monster, she whispered. I'm a realist, Rashid corrected. And now, I'm afraid I'm going to have to be a murderer again, because you've left me no choice. He reached into his jacket, and Layla saw the gun. Time seemed to slow down. She saw Khalid moving, saw Tariq and the other security personnel drawing their own weapons, saw Rashid's finger tightening on the trigger, and then she heard the voice, amplified and authoritative, coming from the entrance to the gallery. NYPD, drop your weapon. Drop it now. Rashid froze. The gallery doors burst open, and suddenly the space was filled with police officers, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Rashid looked around wildly, realizing he was surrounded, realizing he'd been set up. "You," he said, looking at Layla with pure hatred. "You did this." "No," Khalid said, stepping in front of Layla protectively. "We did this. Together. And now you're going to pay for what you did to our son." Rashid was forced to his knees, his hands cuffed behind his back. As the police read him his rights, Layla felt her legs give out. Khalid caught her, holding her up, holding her together. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "It's finally over." "He confessed," Layla said, her voice shaking. "He actually confessed. The cameras got everything." "Everything," Tariq confirmed, approaching with his tablet. "Full confession. Admission of murder, conspiracy, attempted murder. With the evidence you already had, plus this recording, he'll never see freedom again." Layla watched as Rashid was led away, still shouting threats, still trying to maintain his arrogance even as his world crumbled around him. And she felt, not joy exactly, not satisfaction, but something like peace. Like a weight she'd been carrying for 3 years had finally been lifted. "We did it," she said, turning to look at Khalid. "We actually did it." "You did it," Khalid corrected. "You survived. You gathered evidence. You never gave up. You brought justice for our son. I was just trying to make up for failing you before." "You didn't fail me today," Layla said softly. "Today, you stood with me. You believed me. You fought for Amir. That's all I ever wanted." They stood there in the gallery, surrounded by police and security and the evidence of their victory. And for the first time in 3 years, Layla felt like she could breathe, like the future was something more than just survival, like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for something better. The next few days were a whirlwind of police statements, legal proceedings, and media attention. The story of the Sheikh's murdered son and the wife who had disappeared to seek justice captured international attention. Rashid's arrest made headlines around the world. The evidence was overwhelming, and his lawyers, despite their skill and resources, couldn't overcome a full confession captured on video. Layla gave her statement to police, turned over all her evidence, and then retreated to the Plaza penthouse to hide from the media circus. Khalid stayed with her, fielding calls from his family, from lawyers, from business associates. The Al-Rashid family was in crisis, their reputation damaged by Rashid's crimes. But Khalid made it clear that his priority was Layla, not damage control. A week after Rashid's arrest, Layla stood at the windows of the penthouse, looking out at the city that had been her refuge and her prison. Behind her, she heard Khalid and another phone call and approach. "That was the prosecutor," he said. "Rashid's lawyers are trying to negotiate a plea deal. They want to avoid trial. Will they accept it? The prosecutor wants to know what you want. You're the victim here. Your wishes matter." Layla thought about it. A trial would mean more media attention, more scrutiny, more pain. But it would also mean public accountability, a full airing of Rashid's crimes. "I want a trial," she said finally. "I want the world to know exactly what he did. I want Amir's story told. I want justice, not a deal. Then that's what we'll do." Khalid stood beside her, close but not touching. "Layla, I need to ask you something. What happens now, between us?" She had been dreading this question, knowing it was coming but not knowing how to answer it. "I don't know," she admitted. 3 years ago, I loved you more than anything. But 3 years ago, you didn't believe me when I needed you most. And I don't know if I can forget that. I don't know if I can trust you again. I understand, and I don't expect you to forgive me or to trust me or to love me again. But I'm asking for a chance to prove that I've learned from my mistakes, a chance to show you that I can be the man you deserve. And what does that look like? Do I go back to Dubai with you? Become your wife again? Pretend the last 3 years didn't happen. No, Khalid said firmly. You don't pretend anything. You don't go back to being someone you're not. You figure out who you are now, what you want, what makes you happy. And I support you. I'm here for you. As a friend, as a partner, as whatever you need me to be. No expectations. No pressure. Just a chance. Layla turned to look at him, really look at him. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the love that had never really died, the regret that would probably haunt him for the rest of his life. And she saw something else, a willingness to change, to grow, to be better. I got an offer, she said quietly, from Juilliard. They want me to head their music therapy program. The position I was supposed to interview for the day Amir died. They're offering it to me now. That's wonderful, Khalid said, and he sounded like he meant it. You should take it. You'd be brilliant at it. It would mean staying in New York, building a life here, being Layla Bennett or maybe some version of her, instead of Layla Al-Rashid. Then stay. Be whoever you want to be. And if you'll let me, I'll visit. I'll support your work. I'll be part of your life in whatever way you're comfortable with. You do that? Give up the idea of us being together, of being a traditional married couple. I'd do anything for you, Khalid said simply. I've already lost you once because I tried to force you into a mold that didn't fit. I won't make that mistake again. If all I can have is your friendship, your occasional company, then that's infinitely better than not having you in my life at all. Layla felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. Maybe the first step toward healing. Okay, she said. Let's try. Slowly. No promises, no expectations. Just, let's see if we can find our way back to each other. Or forward to something new. Khalid's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. That's all I ask. That's more than I deserve. He held out his hand. And after a moment's hesitation, Layla took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and familiar and full of promise. There's something else, Khalid said. I want to establish a foundation, in Amir's name, to fund music therapy programs for children who have experienced trauma. I want his legacy to be one of healing, of hope, and I want you to run it. Layla's breath caught. Khalid, you don't have to answer now. Think about it. But I want to do this. I want to turn our tragedy into something that helps others. I want Amir's life to have meant something. His life meant everything, Layla said, tears streaming down her face now. He was perfect. He was ours. And he deserved so much more than he got. I know, and we can't bring him back. But we can make sure that other children who are hurting and scared and traumatized, get the help they need. We can use music to heal the way you always believed it could. We can make a difference. It was perfect. It was exactly what Layla needed. A purpose, a mission, a way to honor her son's memory while building something new. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll do it. We'll do it together. Khalid pulled her into his arms, and this time she didn't resist. She let herself be held, let herself feel the comfort of his embrace, let herself imagine a future that wasn't defined by pain and loss. Thank you, Khalid whispered, for giving me another chance, for being strong enough to survive, for bringing justice for our son, for everything. Thank you for believing me, Layla replied, for standing with me, for fighting for Amir. That's all I ever wanted. They stood there as the sun set over Manhattan. Two broken people beginning to heal. Two people who had loved and lost and might find their way back to love again. It wouldn't be easy. There would be hard days ahead, difficult conversations, moments of doubt and pain. But they would face them together. And that, Layla thought, was enough. For now, it was enough. 6 months later, Layla stood on a stage at Lincoln Center, looking out an audience of donors, musicians, therapists, and supporters. The Amir Al-Rashid Foundation for Music Therapy was officially launching, and she was about to give the keynote speech. She had changed in the months since Rashid's arrest. She was stronger, more confident, more herself than she had been in years. She had taken a position at Juilliard and was already making waves with her innovative approaches to music therapy. She had moved into a beautiful apartment in the Upper West Side, paid for with her own salary, not Khalid's money, because that independence mattered to her. She had reconnected with old friends, made new ones, built a life that was entirely her own. And Khalid had kept his promise. He visited once a month, staying at the plaza, taking her to dinner, attending her lectures, supporting her work. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. They hadn't slept together, hadn't even kissed beyond a chaste greeting. But there was something growing between them, something tentative and fragile but real. He was in the audience now, sitting in the front row, his eyes fixed on her with pride and love. Beside him sat his mother, his brothers, members of his family who had flown in for the event. They had apologized to Layla, had welcomed her back, had acknowledged their role in driving her away. It wasn't perfect, and there were still tensions, but it was progress. Layla took a deep breath and began to speak. 3 years ago, I lost my son. Amir was 2 years old, full of life and laughter and love. He loved music. He would dance whenever he heard a song, would sing along even when he didn't know the words. He was joy personified. And then, in one terrible moment, he was gone. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. For a long time, I thought that was the end of my story, that I would never recover from that loss, never find meaning or purpose again. I disappeared. I hid. I survived, but I didn't live. And then, through a series of events that still seem impossible, I found my way back. Back to the truth. Back to justice. Back to myself. She paused, looking directly at Khalid. And back to love. Not the fairy tale love I thought I had before, but something deeper, something earned through pain and forgiveness, and the choice to keep trying even when it would be easier to give up. Khalid's eyes were wet with tears, but he was smiling. The Amir Al-Rashid Foundation exists because I believe that music has the power to heal, that even in our darkest moments, even when we think we can't go on, there is something in melody and rhythm and harmony that can reach us, that can remind us we're human, that can help us process trauma and find hope. She gestured to the screen behind her, where images of children in music therapy sessions played. These children have experienced things no child should experience. Abuse, neglect, violence, loss. But through music therapy, they're learning to express their pain, to process their emotions, to heal. And that's what this foundation will do. We'll fund programs in schools, hospitals, community centers. We'll train therapists. We'll conduct research. We'll make sure that every child who needs this kind of help can access it. The audience erupted in applause. Layla waited for it to die down before continuing. Amir's life was short, but his legacy will be long. Every child we help, every life we touch, every moment of healing we facilitate, that's Amir's gift to the world. That's how we honor him, not by dwelling in grief, but by creating hope. She finished her speech to a standing ovation. As she left the stage, Khalid was waiting in the wings. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. That was perfect, he said. Amir would be so proud. I'm so proud. We did it, Layla said. We turned tragedy into something beautiful. You did it, Khalid corrected. I just provided the funding. You provided the vision, the passion, the heart. We did it together, Layla insisted. That's what matters. Together. Later that night, after the reception, after the congratulations and the photographs and the interviews, Layla and Khalid walked through Central Park. It was late spring, and the trees were in full bloom, the air sweet with the scent of flowers. I have something for you, Khalid said, stopping beside the Bethesda fountain. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Layla's heart began to race. Khalid, it's not what you think, he said quickly. Or maybe it is. I don't know. Just open it. She opened the box to find a ring, but not an engagement ring. It was a simple band of platinum, engraved with musical notes, the opening bars of the lullaby she used to sing to Amir. It's a promise, Khalid said, not a proposal. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if that's not what you want, but a promise that I will always honor Amir's memory, that I will always support your work, that I will always be here for you, in whatever capacity you need. No expectations, no pressure, just love, in whatever form you're comfortable with. Layla looked at the ring, at the notes that represent her son, her grief, her healing, and she looked at Khalid, at this man who had failed her once but was trying so hard to make it right. "Put it on," she said softly. He slid the ring onto her right hand, not her left. A promise, not a commitment. A beginning, not an ending. "I love you," Khalid said. "I never stop loving you. And I will wait as long as it takes for you to love me again. If you ever do." Layla looked up at him, at his face illuminated by the fountain's lights, and she realized something. She did love him. Maybe she had never stopped. But it was different now. Not the blind, passionate love of youth, but something deeper, something that had been tested and broken and rebuilt stronger.